Welcome again for today's lecture and webinar about sulforaphane. It's entitled A Walk Through Its Discovery from Clinical Trials and Beyond. Today, I'll be your host. My name is Dr. Raymond Joseph Escalona, and I am a founder of Nutrigineering, which is a company that we started a couple of years ago. I think it's 3 years now since we started the company. And our main goal is to bring nutrition solutions to Southeast Asia. We started off with crafting various meal plans for patients in clinics. Then we went into consultancies for different communities where we help them create nutrition and lifestyle programs. And more recently, we're into looking into different therapeutic options for various chronic illnesses, which is what we'll be talking about today. So this is actually one of the first things we've discovered a couple of years ago. And if you make a quick search online, you'll notice the hot topic for the day. I don't know if it's for the day, but I think for the past year has really been this word called sulforaphane. If you follow a couple of the different podcasters, bloggers, you have here Rhonda Patrick, which is a famous lady in the US. She had interviewed Dr. Jed Fahey, where they spoke about all the benefits of the compound called sulforaphane, which is from broccoli or other types of cruciferous vegetables. So currently, if you do a search on pubmed.gov, you'll find out that there are about 2,452 search results for sulforaphane. And with those search results, you'll have the different types of applications across the years. I'll share with you in a couple of moments. Really, the reason why we brought this in was in, I believe, late 2019. I was in the US, and in the US, I had met one of our speakers for today, Dr. Chris Diadamo. We were at a conference, and he had mentioned to me the work of Dr. Jed Fahey and other researchers on the application of sulforaphane for the autism spectrum disorder chronic illness. So within that year, I tested out some of the products locally here. Coming from the US, of course, brought it here. And upon trial, we found that the results of the clinical trials in the US were mimicking the outcomes that we were seeing locally. So what did the clinical trials contain? Our lecturers will be speaking about it in today's as they go through their subtopics and their talking points for today. So more on that later. But suffice to say, within a year of trying the product, trying to pull in the product from the US to bring it here, the success clinically had pushed our team to try to create some sort of pie or some sort of kind of pathway for other patients to take it to try to use the product and for us to get more clinical data locally. So today is not my lecture. I'm not going to be discussing the clinical data from my experience locally, but we will see the work of both doctors. So the first physician we have is Dr. Brian Cornblatt. And Dr. Brian is actually the director, is a director in Nutramax Laboratories for clinical research and science. And he's been a director of clinical research of Nutramax Laboratories. And in those roles, he develops novel nutraceutical formulations, designs them both in vitro and clinical studies in support of those products, and summarizes both supporting laboratory and clinical research for healthcare workers and consumers, so people like us. Prior to coming to Nutramax in 2010, he was the scientific director and developer of the Catholic Health Initiative Center for Translational Research. They call it the CTR. It was a combined molecular research laboratory with a national biorepository and diagnostic laboratory. So at the time, 2010s, he was head of the CTR, and CTR had supported research initiatives throughout CHI's 40 oncology centers. So Chicago's 40 oncology centers. So a Johns Hopkins University medicine graduate with a Ph.D. in pharmacology and molecular sciences and a postdoctorate fellowship from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Environmental Sciences Division of Toxicology. Dr. Cornblatt, or Brian as we call him, has been involved in medical research since 1990. Dr. Cornblatt's main research topics and interests were focused on developing novel formulations comprised of natural-based phytochemicals, including IC3, if you're familiar with the compound, isothiocyanates, to minimize chronic inflammation and combat the threats of environmental toxicants. His most recent development has been a novel line of products. So Avmacol was one of the products from Nutramax Laboratories, which deliver the essential ingredients needed to support the production of sulforaphane, which is our main topic for today, a phytochemical with many emerging indications. Dr. Brian Cornblatt served on the board of the Susan Cohen Colon Cancer Foundation. His father is now a 25-year survivor of metastatic colorectal cancer, and I think he can share about that later. And his mother, a survivor of uterine cancer. Both have had both cancers, of course, have had profound influences in his career. Dr. Brian Cornblatt is also the father of two incredible daughters and spends his nights and weeknights outdoors as much as possible, either on the soccer field, lacrosse field, running, cycling in the rural areas of Western Maryland. So he's our first lecturer for today. They'll kind of do a baton pass Olympic tag team later on, as you'll see. And our second main speaker for today is Dr. Chris Diadamo. Dr. Chris was the one that I'd met a couple of years ago who introduced me to sulforaphane way before a lot of these hype came in. And Dr. Chris is a research scientist with expertise in synergistic effects of healthy lifestyle, environmental exposure, and genetics on human health and wellness. You know, he received a Ph.D. in epidemiology from the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and is currently an assistant professor with dual appointments in the Department of Family and Community Medicine and Epidemiology and Public Health in Maryland University. Dr. Diadamo, or Dr. Chris, as we know him, serves as the director for the Center of Integrative Medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. So he's the director for the center, the first academic-based integrative medicine center in the world, with a nearly 30-year history featuring over 800 peer-reviewed scientific publications, over $50 million worth of competitive research funding, an expansive medical professional education program, and outpatient, inpatient integrative clinical care. He also holds adjunct faculty positions in the gerontology doctoral program of the University of Maryland and at Maryland University of Integrative Health, where he was involved in the creation of nutrition and integrative health graduate programs. Dr. Diadamo has served as a principal investigator on a wide variety of clinical trials and observational studies in the areas of nutrition, physical activity, stress management, and multimodality integrative and functional medicine interventions. His research experiences have cut across entire lifespan from children to older adults and has extended from the bench to the bedside and beyond into community settings and within schools, hospitals, and other institutions of public health influence. Dr. Chris has published his findings in numerous peer-reviewed articles, including Nutrition, Clinical Nutrition, Nutrition Research, American Journal of Health Promotion, Journal of Nutrition, American Journal of Preventive Medicine, Nutrients, which is my favorite journal, by the way, Journal of Nutrigenetics and Nutrigenomics, Journal of Nutrition, Aging and Health, Journal of the American College of Nutrition, Food Quality and Preference, and the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, among many others. Dr. Chris has also contributed content to medical textbooks, chapters to the 6th and 7th editions of Rheumatology, 5th and 6th editions of Practical Management of Pain, gives invited lectures across the world on the topics of nutrition, physical activity, stress management, and other topics in integrative, functional, and lifestyle medicine. Dr. Chris has lent his scientific experience in advisory board roles for many entities, including the Institute for Functional Medicine, IFM, where I personally trained at. Alongside these academic avenues, Dr. Chris is frequently sought for media commentary and has been featured in USA Today, Men's Health, WebMD, National Health, Shape Magazine, Dr. Oz, Food Network, Good Housekeeping PBS, AARP, the Arthritis Foundation, New York Magazine, and many other popular media outlets. And so without further ado, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Let's go and we'll pass the floor on to our two speakers, Dr. Chris, Dr. Brian. You're up. Welcome, guys. Thank you for accepting our invitation for lecture.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Raymond.
And then hopefully you can see this in real time. Let me know if give me a confirmation that you're seeing our screen.
Yes, you are good.
All right, perfect. Well, again, thanks for having us. And we hope to have a great presentation here for you all. And then at the end, we'll be able to answer some questions. So to get it started, just as a background, I'm employed by a dietary supplement company as Raymond had shared, that produces products promoting sulforaphane production. And I'm inventor of 3 issued patents and 4 pending patent applications based on sulforaphane and health support. And we're going to be talking a lot about that wonderful phytonutrient sulforaphane throughout this morning's lecture. Just a little bit of further background. As you heard, both my parents were diagnosed with cancer, so that's had a profound impact on my life. But I want to just go back a little bit earlier. So in the 1980s, when I was still in high school, it was in this quick span of just 3 years, we lost a dear family friend to breast cancer. One of my close friends' mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. We lost my brother's best friend, Andy, to neuroendothelioma. And then, as you heard, I was blessed. I got into medical school. I wanted to be a pediatric oncologist and treat kids, who had cancer. And then in 1996, I was a second-year student at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and I was part of the team that diagnosed my own father with metastatic colorectal cancer. The good news is, just yesterday, we all got together. My eldest daughter had a birthday, so we celebrated that, and I sat right next to my father, who is still here with us. So sulforaphane has been part of that journey. And the main point why I have these pictures is, back then, in the late 80s and early 90s, we tended to think that genetics was one of the mainstays as to why we get, beyond cancer, chronic diseases that, a lot of you who are healthcare workers in the audience today, that you deal with. We used to think it was a lot like the mainstay was genetics. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The more I started getting into cancer research and research in healthcare in general, the more we started realizing that it's really due to a lot more environmental toxicants and this interplay between our genetics and the environment. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that this morning as well. So with that background, let me dive a little bit further. There's 2 big quotes that I think are going to be really important. First is Bob Barker, who was a TV personality when I was growing up. And he said, I think that age as a number is not nearly as important as health. You can be in poor health and be pretty miserable at 40 or 50. If you're in good health, you can enjoy things well into your 80s. And then Eleanor Roosevelt said, in the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. And you can see the title here of this slide, we each must take control of our own health destiny. And again, for the healthcare workers in the audience, not just ourselves, but also patients as well, family members, loved ones, friends. So again, it's really our responsibility to take control of our own health destiny, and because of that interplay between genetics and our environment. Let's dive a little bit deeper there. These are going to be some statistics about the United States I can share with you, from many of the nations that you guys are coming from today, primarily in the Philippines. This applies there as well. My wife is actually Filipino-American, Grace. So again, when we talk to friends and family back in the Philippines, we know that these statistics are just as prevalent in the Philippines and many other countries around the entire world. So by any number of measures, America's health is failing. We spend far more per capita on healthcare than any other society in the entire world. Yet 2/3 of Americans are overweight. Over 15 million have diabetes, and that's primarily now type 2 diabetes. We fall prey to heart disease, and often as we did 30 years ago. And even knowing all these risk factors, it's amazing over 100 million Americans presently have high cholesterol. Half of Americans have a health problem that requires taking at least 1 prescription drug every single day, with many over the age of 50, and this number is going down and down and down, taking more than 3. And when I was still in the wards in the 1990s, we called this obviously polypharmacy, and we would ask the patients to bring in paper bags with their medicines. And it wasn't uncommon to have 30 and 40-year-olds bringing in, half a dozen bottles of medication. And what was alarming back then is, before like the days of computers like we have now in the 90s, we'd have to look in our big textbooks, the drug-drug interactions. And by the time we got to 6, it was really almost impossible to figure out really how all these were interplaying from a health perspective. And then this chart, I think, is something that's, again, global. Here in the US, you can see here the drug sales in the billions, and it's going up and up and up and up. And it's not unfair to say that we love to treat symptoms like chronic pain, but for too long have completely ignored the root causes. That's why I fell in love more than a decade ago with integrative and functional health genres. Just the work that you all do in trying to find and figure out those root causes and tackle them have been just revolutionary in terms of patient outcomes and good patient outcomes. What about our kids? And again, this applies globally as well. We're currently leading our youth down a path of disease earlier and earlier in their lives. 1/3 of young Americans now are overweight or at risk of becoming overweight. And increasingly, young Americans are falling prey to that form of diabetes, type 2, that used to only be seen in adults. I can tell you, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, I knew one child, one of my friends, who had type 2 diabetes. my kids, I have two daughters that are both now in high school. Literally, there are half a dozen, if not more, that have type 2 diabetes in every one of their classes. So it's really an epidemic here in the United States and globally of, kind of obesity and lack of exercise and, falling prey to a lot of processed foods and now type 2 diabetes. And these young Americans, just like I shared that polypharmacy picture, are taking more prescription drugs than ever before. And these aren't a cure. These are just sadly, most of them to mask symptoms. It's something they'll be on probably the rest of their lives too. So I know this is kind of bleak. And from my perspective, the future is bleak unless we do something, because globally, if you look at all healthcare expenditures, globally, less than 3% are spent on disease prevention and wellness, which is the career path I chose to take in 1996. And that leaves 97% of all healthcare funding around the world is spent on developing new drugs, and a little bit is for diagnostics. So again, less than 3% is on disease prevention and wellness. And why is that important? As I shared, in the United States, we spend far more per capita, far more per person than any country in the entire world. Yet we rank 50th right now in 2021 out of all the countries in terms of life expectancy. In terms of cost of spending, healthcare is by far more than education, military, and infrastructure alone. And Chris and I can laugh a little bit at this infrastructure. A bill might pass that we're not happy with that might change that number a little bit. But as of today, healthcare is far more than education, military, and infrastructure costs alone in the United States. And then this is the sad and alarming part. 75 cents of every healthcare dollar spent in the United States goes to these chronic diseases, which I'm sure a lot of you agree with are largely preventable: obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, lung disease. So again, we're spending a great deal of money on things that, if we just applied these integrative and functional medicine concepts, I think we could really lower those costs and focus more on prevention and wellness. Having said that, what is driving all of this? Well, it turns out, we have, just like most countries around the world, we have these dietary guidelines that we could argue behind the scenes might be questionable at best, but they do recommend at least 3 to 5 servings of vegetables and fruits a day. And what we can see here is, by and large, Americans, about 80% of us don't even get 3 to 5 fruit servings a day or vegetables. So that's alarming. And what we're really good at is, again, going way above our recommendations of added sugars and sodium, and those can create a lot of health problems, right? The diabetes, the heart disease, etc. And I want to talk about the food supply, because I was blessed when I was in graduate school in the 1990s. My wife and I, at the time, we actually, Grace, we wound up going to Alaska on a trip, and we got to see wild caught salmon and salmon fishing. The problem is, nowadays in the United States, greater than 70% of our salmon that we buy in the grocery stores comes literally from the exits of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in China, where it goes into the Pacific Ocean. And what you see here, this is the typical picture. This is from the Yellow River, and each one of these little bins has a different fish. You can imagine the exercise is horrible. They've been kind of confined to these cages their entire lives. And what they get fed with is environmental toxicants from all the industry that flows into these rivers, as well as chicken feces and other animal feces. So very unhealthy. And if you've never known, this is farm salmon. The white lines represent fat. You can see they're much fattier than the wild caught. What I'm going to share a lot about is these environmental toxicants. They're lipophilic, so they love fat and they take up residence in the fat. So this farm fish that we get mostly from China contains all these toxicants in the fat. They're high. So again, the higher fat content, higher in toxins. And then there's FD and C dyes are added to even make it look kind of like wild caught fish. And when you do a nutritional profile, you see they're loaded in omega-6s compared to omega-3s. And by and large, omega-6s drive inflammation. They're pro-inflammatory. We compare that to the wild-caught fish that I got to see on our trip back in the 90s, leaner, cleaner, naturally pink. And you can see they're missing those white fat striations. So they don't have as much of those, almost none of those toxins that are going to really drive inflammation. And most importantly, this type of salmon and fish contains higher amounts of those anti-inflammatory omega-3s that are so wonderful for us. And I talked about inflammation. It's amazing that we can take either a blood draw or urine and look at some of these biomarkers that you'll hear about in some of our studies that Chris is going to share about in a few minutes. And these things like interleukin 6, the metalloproteinases, C-reactive protein, prostaglandins. And the reason I bring this up is because when I was in the wards and when I was trained at Hopkins, we would get these test results back and we'd just be able to share that, hey, you have high inflammation, but we didn't dive deep enough. We didn't figure out where that inflammation was coming from. Had that patient just run a marathon? Had they maybe had a decade, bout with osteoarthritis, or maybe they were just completely, the wrong nutrition. And so all these three kind of starting points will give you the same kind of picture, but really we need to dive deeper in the history to figure out what we can do and how we can tame that inflammation if we need to. Again, the marathon runners, within a few days, that's going to be, suppressed. But for somebody who has a bad lifestyle, this is probably going to get worse and worse. And beyond, our diets, we now know that pollution is by far killing more people than even violence and wars alone. And this was something, if you guys have not seen this article, you can certainly Google it, and I can send it to Raymond, and we can share it with the crowd. But in the Lancet, 2 years ago, they did an assessment in 2015 of premature deaths. And what they found is globally, that there were greater than 8.5 million people killed prematurely by no other than pollution alone, air pollution and water pollution. And what you can see from this study, 6.5 million people because of air pollution, 1.8 million because of water pollution. And again, I think this is something most of us don't even think about daily. It's very timely because I don't know if you've seen on the news, here in the United States, we have a very big heat wave on the Pacific Northwest. So in Oregon, there's huge fires. I mean, some fires that are the size of some of the states near where Chris and I live here in Maryland. And this was just a screenshot that I took on Thursday morning last week. And what you can see here, or Tuesday morning, what you can see here is the air from the Pacific Northwest was going thousands of miles over here to Maryland and causing haziness and really poor air quality. My nieces actually were born prematurely, so they have asthma, and they're affected by, again, smoke from these fires that are all the way 3,000 miles away. And I know you all, especially in the Philippines, have lots of issues with some of the pollution from India and China that gets put into the jet stream and comes over and can cause profound inflammation and health problems. And then I know that largely most of you are from the Philippines. And then this is something, again, that you know a lot about. This is a picture from Manila. And just like us in our big cities, the industrial pollution, the car pollution, and then even our water pollution. It's sad. We're going to be taking a trip down to Florida soon. And there's some algae blooms right now in the Gulf Coast from just man-made pollution. It's really devastating. So I shared with you that second slide where I had that little image of the DNA. And so our health is really this interplay between genetics, which I think is a smaller factor, and really these environmental exposures, both endogenous and external sources of what we'll learn as reactive oxygen species. And then if you don't believe me, this is my thesis work was actually on prostate cancer. And this opened my eyes to the fact that our genome does not control our destiny, it's just our potential. So Shanghai, which is not that far away, and sadly one of the major producers of industrial pollution, just because of so many people and so much industry in Shanghai and north in the Qidong province, this is actually looking at prostate cancer rates. And without getting into too much detail, the lower the number, the better, the higher the number, the worse. And what we can see is if you're a US born Caucasian male, you have the highest rates of prostate cancer anywhere in the entire world, which is just incredible to think about. And then if you're a male born in Shanghai, you have some of the lower rates. You can see just how much lower. And then the interesting thing about how the environment can impact our genetics. So if you're a male and you're born in Shanghai, and then your parents migrate, say, to the West Coast of America, and you live there for less than 5 years, your prostate cancer rate doesn't change at all. But if you've now born in China, so you have the genetics, and then you move to the United States and you spend more than 5 years in the United States, your rates of getting prostate cancer have now gone up more than tenfold. And you can see if those same parents from China had moved to the United States and then you were born in the United States, you now have almost a 40-fold increase in prostate cancer rates. So again, the longer you're here in the United States, the increased risk of getting prostate cancer. So again, your genetics don't control your destiny. They're one part. It's really this environment. And I tried to share a little bit with you about our pollution that we have here and our processed foods and what they can do. And these external sources we call them reactive oxygen species. It could be atmospheric pollution, even stress, cortisol can drive this, poor diets. What they do is at the cellular level, these reactive oxygen species can damage our macromolecules. And these include our DNA, our proteins, and our lipids. And when these chemicals and these metabolites bind to those macromolecules, they can cause profound impacts, even cancer, and can be very devastating to our overall health and wellness. And it's not just external sources that we have to worry about. I give a lot of talks to different levels, and I'll sometimes give talks to STEM class in high school. And I tell people, one of the most dangerous things you can do is breathe oxygen. But I don't want people to become hypoxic and hold their breath. And the reason for this is because of mitochondria that you might have learned about in high school or medical school or college, graduate school. And you guys remember, and there's not going to be a quiz or test, so don't get nervous. But you guys remember the electron transport chain. This is where we take key nutrients and we ultimately make ATP, our cellular energy. Well, the electron transport chain uses a hydrogen gradient to make ATP, and this is our body's primary producer of reactive oxygen species. So just like those environmental toxicants can cause these reactive oxygen species, so does our own cells in just trying to produce cellular energy. And the problem is this evolution picture here. I love this, and this shows this isn't that long ago, and this is kind of those why I gave that those statistics in the beginning. More and more Americans are obese and having problems with type 2 diabetes. And the real problem is when there is energy surplus and low energy consumption, our mitochondria will be more prone to produce more ATP in this harmful reactive oxygen species, this kind of side effect of making ATP. And in our modern society where lazy activities are in the increase and processed food, this is a buffet. I was saddened to see a commercial over the weekend where the buffets are coming back again. I was hoping they'd be shut down completely because of COVID. These are not good for overall health and wellness, but they're back. And this is a real concern. And if you think about our genetics, it's only been about 10,000 years where we used to have frequent mobility and often scarce resources. Now we've completely tipped the corner. Now we just, a lot of us just watch the Olympics instead of participating in any kind of sports. And we eat, all the wrong foods, unfortunately. And this has a major impact in ramping up those internal sources of reactive oxygen species. And so what are some of the solutions? You could say we could live in a bubble. And for those of you who know, like integrative medicine, that's not good because the sun's going to hit the plastic bubble and that's going to create phthalates, BPA, these pseudoestrogens that can drive cancer. So this isn't a good solution. So what I'm going to hopefully share with you is something that was discovered literally thousands of years ago. And Hippocrates had said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And I see Chris here and he's smiling whenever I put this up. All these colors, to others, we just see different colors. To Chris and I, we see all these phytonutrients that are just so wonderful at the molecular level. And we're going to dive deeper. And Raymond as well, I'm sure also is excited to see these colors. And why is that? Well, again, this big kind of scary term phytonutrients, it represents these chemicals and these precursors that are found in whole classes of fruits and vegetables that are just completely wonderful at promoting health and wellness. And what I got interested in was cruciferous vegetables. And my dad was diagnosed in 1996. Raymond put up the great kind of introductory slide there showing that there's over 2,400 publications on sulforaphane. I got introduced to sulforaphane at Johns Hopkins. It's where this was discovered in 1994. When I started working on sulforaphane, there were 4 publications. Now there's over 2,400. It's been a lot of journal articles that I've read over the years, and it's been absolutely wonderful to see this interest. But the reason people started looking at cruciferous vegetables and discovering sulforaphane in the first place was in the 60s and 70s, there were just dozens of epidemiological studies that were published showing this great positive relationships between the more fruits and vegetables people ate and the promotion of good health. And in particular at Hopkins, they started seeing this interplay between cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, cauliflower, kale, bok choy, and decreases in overall cancer rates. And so my mentors, Dr. Paul Talley, Tom Kensler, John Groopman, and Jed Fahey, they actually started this wonderful journey where they looked at these cruciferous vegetables and looked at some of these phytonutrients and found that there was this precursor, glucoraphanin, found in crucifers. And here it is. And this is going to be one of the more complicated slides I'll show you today. So this is this precursor glucoraphanin. It's found in cell vacuoles of these plant cells, these cruciferous vegetables. There's an enzyme myrosinase. This is sequestered in the plant cell wall. And when an insect or a human being chews on the plant, the glucoraphanin and myrosinase enzyme come together. There's a hydrolysis reaction, and then sulforaphane is produced. And this is the main reason why I've spent almost now 26 years of my life studying sulforaphane, is because at the cellular level, one of the first pathways we discovered was sulforaphane activated this transcription factor called NRF2. And at the cellular level, it induced over 100 protective phase 2 detoxifying and antioxidative enzymes. And these enzymes are present in our cells, and they deal with all those reactive oxygen species and environmental toxins that we have to deal with in our lives. And it's just remarkable. This one phytonutrient derived from this precursor in broccoli can actually turn on so many protective genes. And then this is just a list, and I hope this doesn't trigger some kind of nightmares tonight for those who might have had to learn this in graduate school, but these shouldn't be scary. And I had to learn each one of these, like uracilglycosyl transferase, the sulfotransferases, the glutathione transferases. I spent my whole thesis 4 years working on glutathione transferase pi1 for prostate cancer, but these are wonderful enzymes that you want induced and upregulated in our cells. They protect us from all these internal and external sources of stress. And then if you want to read a little bit further about sulforaphane, we published our first clinical trial in 2007 in carcinogenesis, and we actually did a kind of combination animal and humans clinical trial, and we looked at the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of sulforaphane. This was early on the sulforaphane work, and we wanted to see what exactly does sulforaphane do at the cellular level. And this is actually looking at breast tissue. This was a breast protection or chemoprotection study. This is actually looking at breast tissue. This is ductal epithelial cells, transverse and sagittal. Here would be, hopefully you can see my precursor in real time, this would be where the milk would flow. These are the ductal cells that if they have, for example, a hit from benzene, can bind to DNA and cause a mutation that can lead to ductal carcinoma of breast cancer. And you can see the immunostaining here. This is for an enzyme, quinone oxidoreductase. This helps to break down metabolized benzene, which is ever present in our environment. There's a little bit of brown staining, so that means there's some, several tens of thousands of copies of quinone oxidoreductase in these cells. We gave sulforaphane, and then we actually took tissue 2 days later. This is 40 hours later. You can see it's much browner or much deeper brown. And we say the analogy, it's like a light switch, so a dimmer switch. There's always a little bit of these phase 2 enzymes present in our cells because of all this internal and external production of reactive oxygen species. But when we give something like sulforaphane, what we can see is this incredibly ramped up production of these phase 2 enzymes. And what's amazing is one dose of sulforaphane has this long-lived pharmacodynamic response. We know that we can see changes in gene expression of these enzymes 72 hours later, 3 days later from one dose. So a very powerful way to induce these protective phase 2 enzymes. And then I like to say that we discovered this whole system, but that's not the case. I gave you that quote on purpose from Hippocrates over 2,000 years ago. I was a history minor in college, and I always loved medical history. And if you go back into the books, Cato, and I love this too, before television, and I don't know how many in the audience have teenagers, before television and the phone where we have all these apps, people did a lot of stuff. So this is Cato. He was a Roman statesman. He was a farmer, soldier, author. I mean, they did so many things back in the day. And again, I think it's without television, all these things that gravitate and grab all of our minutes and hours these days. But he wrote a book on farming more than 2,300 years ago. And if you read on page 137 and 138, if you put crushed cabbage, cruciferous vegetable leaf, on all wounds and tumors, it will cure all those sores and make them well without pain. If a cancerous ulcer appears on the breast, apply crushed cabbage leaf, again, a crucifer, and it will make it well. So again, myself and Tale, Kenzer, Grootman, Fahey, we all are happy that we've rediscovered what Cato actually knew and his colleagues over 2,000 years ago. It's absolutely amazing to think that we've known this for all this time. And so with that, we did some of the initial work, and we published in 2007 some of the first clinical trials. And then my colleagues, Dr. Fahey and Tale and Kenzer and Grootman, they did a lot of work and amazing seminal work on really putting this to a real life population. And they went to Shanghai, just north in Qidong province. If you guys watch the nightly news like I do in the winter months, you'll see in November, December, and January, Qidong province is the most polluted area in the entire world. And sadly, there are teenagers who get primary lung cancer, not because they smoke or their parents smoke, just because of the environment that they're living in. And it's absolutely horrible. And so this group actually went out there and did interventional studies to see if they can remove the benzene and acrolein that's largely found in this pollution from cells and from lungs of these people who live in the Qidong province. So, and benzene, I'm going to talk about that in more detail. Why is it so powerful? It can go into our blood, and the metabolites will actually go into our bone marrow, where it can cause anemia, low red blood cell counts. It can cause low white blood cell counts, so people can get life-threatening infections. It can even cause low blood platelet counts, and this can cause bruising and bleeding. And worse, benzene metabolites can actually bind to DNA, and they have been linked to leukemia and other rare blood-based cancers. So benzene is a really bad kind of entity, and that's largely found in a lot of this industrial pollution that we breathe in or makes contact in our skin. So what they did is they did an intervention study for 12 weeks. And back in the day, before we had created our product, they actually used to create this tea every morning that contained known amounts of sulforaphane, or they had a placebo. And they gave it to the townspeople, over 291 in this study published in 2014, this proof of concept study. And then they would collect the urine and measure these benzene metabolites. And you can see within days, there was more benzene in the urine of the participants that took the sulforaphane versus a placebo. And this was done over 12 weeks. It doesn't go away, this response. And when they further looked into it, they're inducing these phase 2 enzymes. They're able to metabolize away benzene, remove it in the urine. And the more we can get the benzene and pollution in the urine, the less chance it has to take up residence in our fat cells, in our DNA, proteins and lipids, and cause problem at the cellular level. So this is a wonderful outcome that we can remove these pollutants just by taking this intervention that comes initially from cruciferous vegetables. And then I wish it was this easy. This is something I actually got from Dr. Kenzer, again, based on the China study. And then often I don't have the privilege to give a talk like I am this morning, and I'll have a short, say, elevator ride with somebody, depending on how high the building is. And if somebody were to ask me, what does sulforaphane do? I tell them, just like us human beings, we all have stress in our lives, right? For me, my daughter just had her birthday. She just left at 5 this morning with her friend. They're going to the Eastern Shore, a 3-hour car ride. Her friend's a new driver, so I'm stressed about that. God willing, they'll have a safe journey and come back well and happy tonight. We have financial stress, stress with COVID, stress sometimes at work. And so what I do personally, I know Chris and Raymond do as well. I love to go out as much as I can. And Chris can attest, we go out every morning. We have a lot of calls sometimes when we're taking our walks. I love to take a walk. I'm an avid cyclist, and I do this at least 4 to 5 days a week. And this is how I reset and recharge my whole body. I get rid of the stress. And what I like to say in an elevator ride is that sulforaphane is your cells kind of walk in nature. And what it does, it helps to reset by inducing these phase 2 enzymes, and it helps to get rid of all these internal, external sources of cellular stress. So again, it's like your cells nature walk, and this protects all those macromolecules and helps to really drive down inflammation. And so the problem is, a lot of people ask, can't you just eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and can't you just eat lots of broccoli? And I've given talks at nutrition conferences where I'm scared to death to say, no, that's not the only answer. Keep eating those vegetables because they have lots of other micronutrients. But if you really want the sulforaphane story, this chart shows it all. We have the highest level of that glucoraphanin sulforaphane precursor in seeds, less with 3-day-old sprouts. And then when you get to market stage broccoli, and we've tested this in the labs, you have very low glucoraphanin and maracinase enzyme. And there's been many people, friends and colleagues, myself included, we've tried to grow sprouts. Anybody that's done that, it's very laborious. You have to add lots of water. You have to worry about micro-contamination. In the young and the old, this is a real problem. And there's been lots of recalls, unfortunately, with sprouts in the supermarkets because of micro-contamination. And so again, just eating copious amounts of broccoli, you don't know if you're going to get enough glucoraphanin or that maracinase enzyme. And if you yourself, or if you have kids that are anything like mine, even though I know the sulforaphane story, we still heat up or stir fry our vegetables for our kids. It just tastes a lot better. And the maracinase enzyme is a protein. If you remember from school, these proteins are nicely folded, and heat can actually unfold and inactivate these proteins. So if you microwave like we do our broccoli, you're going to be left with, if you're lucky enough, glucoraphanin and then no maracinase to convert it into sulforaphane. So that's a real problem. And so the other thing too is, don't forget, here in America and all over the world, most people don't eat their recommended even 3 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So if you have patients and you tell them, hey, you just have to eat like 21 cups of broccoli to get the sulforaphane story, good luck with that. They're not even eating 3 to 5 servings. So it's going to be really difficult. And then I love this cartoon, and it's true. I have kids, and as much as I'm the sulforaphane guy, getting them to eat vegetables, when they were growing up was really difficult. And this is Family Circus. When it says child's plate, it means no vegetables, right? So getting people to eat their vegetables is a real problem, really throughout the world. And so that's the whole reason why, as Raymond alluded to, and you saw I have some patents on this, we created a product called Admicol, and we launched this in 2012. It was the very first product globally to include broccoli seed and sprout extracts that provided standardized amounts of glucoraphanin, that sulforaphane precursor, and that active maracinase enzyme needed to convert it to sulforaphane. And we call this the sulforaphane production system. And just as I shared, when I first got into sulforaphane research in the 1990s, we had first discovered these early kind of pathways as to what was happening at the cellular level. And we knew that it was inducing phase 2 enzymes I didn't share, very exciting, and induces glutathione production as well, which is really wonderful. Glutathione, one of the body's main antioxidants. The amazing other pathway, which I love, the second pathway to be discovered for sulforaphane, is that it decreases the NF-kappa B pro-inflammatory pathway. I think there's no arguing that inflammation drives most of chronic diseases. And so what we know is sulforaphane at the cellular level drives down interleukins, prostaglandins, metalloproteinases, all these cytokines, chemokines. That's a wonderful thing. It doesn't get rid of it completely. So as a cyclist, I take my Admicol to quench some of that good inflammation, but it helps to kind of modulate and drive down chronic inflammation from all those stressors that we talked about. And Chris will share a little bit when he talks about autism and ASD. The third pathway that was discovered is that it helps to induce heat shock proteins, which we know are, when a child has autism, for example, and they get a fever, 70% of kids, their symptoms will go away. And we know it's due to some of this increase in these heat shock proteins. And so we know that sulforaphane can actually mimic the fever without causing negative consequences by inducing those heat shock proteins. So hopefully you guys have learned a little bit more about sulforaphane, and I'll be more than delighted to answer questions after this talk. And now I'm gonna, because of the Olympics, we'll pass the baton now to Chris for the track and field event, and Chris will take it away. So thanks again for having us this morning. And Chris, you should be able to take over now.
Go ahead and share. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you and share my perspectives on this. But first, I'll get into my disclosures. So I consult and provide scientific counseling and research assistant to a variety of companies and entities that you see listed here, mostly in the nutrition, integrative, and functional medicine areas. But where I spend the vast majority of my time is at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, where, as Dr. Escalona introduced earlier, I direct the Center for Integrative Medicine. And we were the first such center in the world, actually, in an academic medical environment. And you can see from the pictures here, we are located in this building right next to the columns, but directly adjacent to sort of high-tech, top-level medical university that has, one of the world's best trauma centers and so on. And we've, as I'll show on an ensuing slide, been able to bring a lot of these modalities into conventional care, primarily research-driven. So again, as Raymond mentioned in the intro, our bread and butter has been clinical research. So we've had dozens of grants from the National Institutes of Health, lots of funding in those areas to do a variety of different clinical trials that I'll show on an ensuing slide. I also love the educational aspect of this. So we get to bring these modalities into the core curriculum of medical students. So the next generation of physicians are getting trained in a lot of the lifestyle modalities that Dr. Cornblatt mentioned, nutritional and otherwise. And we have a clinical practice. So I oversee we have both inpatient care and an outpatient clinic. And, in this field of integrated medicine, we're very rarely the first destination for a lot of these patients. So, we'll see them having seen, 6 to a dozen doctors even for a lot of these chronic conditions. So autism is one of the areas where we see patients, but we're now a part of our cancer center. So a lot of my work in recent years has been in cancer. We've done diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So one of the nice things about this field is that you get to see such a variety of different patients and see common underlying causes here, which is one of the things that attracted me from an intellectual level to sulforaphane because of the mechanisms that Dr. Cornblatt shared. When you start to look at inflammation, oxidative stress, heat shock proteins, that this could be a useful tool in a variety of different conditions that we see, chronic diseases where patients are really suffering. So for those that aren't familiar with integrated medicine, this graphic, I think, sums it up pretty nicely. It's a field that's undergone many different name changes over the years, maybe first called holistic medicine, then complementary medicine, alternative medicine. It's gone through a bunch of different name changes that are more than just semantics. It's actually the integration of conventional care, which is predominantly medication driven surgery, along with a lot of these other modalities that you see listed here. So it's not eschewing or avoiding pharmaceuticals by any means. If a patient has an infection, you're going to take an antibiotic. If someone gets in a car accident, you're not going to use garlic. You're going to do a surgery if necessary. But it also works in a lot of these other types of modalities that I'll show on a next slide: stress management, lifestyle and behavior, non-pharmacological pain, and then nutrition and herbs, which has been my big areas of research. And we've really been at the heart of RCTs in this area. As all of you know, RCTs, randomized controlled trials, are sort of the gold standard of clinical research. And our center has conducted well over 20 at this stage in a variety of different areas. So you see acupuncture there on the far right image. We did some seminal work that now this is covered by most insurers in the US and other parts of the world as well. My big areas have been in nutrition, and dietary supplements in particular. Why would we concentrate on that? Dietary supplements in the US and many other parts of the world, over half of Americans, well over half, take a dietary supplement. And there's not enough research on these, although it's really accelerated in part due to our work, but also with many colleagues to show that, there are dietary supplements that can be useful in managing and even treating diseases. That said, there is a huge discrepancy in quality, from brand to brand and so on. And one of the biggest questions, and you may see this too in your clinical practice, is how do you choose a dietary supplement? We get this from our patients all the time. Which one do I take? And it probably doesn't matter that much, for things like vitamin D or vitamin C. It's fairly simple. But for things like probiotics, herbs, and as we'll see with sulforaphane supporting supplements, notice I don't say sulforaphane supplements because you really are better off taking the precursors of this, both of them. So it's a glucoraphanin, and you need to have that active muracinase enzyme if you hearken back to one of Dr. Cornblatt's slides. So how do you make this choice? And one of the things that we tell patients is, you don't want to value shop. We understand people have, financial considerations that are very real, particularly for a lot of our patients who are economically underserved in Baltimore, Maryland. But I always say, value shop with your paper towels or your sponges or things like that, not something that you're consuming that has real physiological effects that can be either positive or negative. If you take a product that has contaminants or doesn't have what it says it has. So this is a challenging area. But before getting into some of the sulforaphane clinical trials, I thought it might be helpful to walk you through what I've kind of come up with as a 3-step plan in terms of how to make evidence-informed decisions on choosing dietary supplements, both for ourselves, but for our patients. Because, those of us who are in this field know that, this company does a good job with herbs, but not so much with anything else. This one does a good job with probiotics and not so much with anything else, or micronutrients. That's too much for patients. So if you try to step back and take a 30,000-foot view at this, these are the 3 steps that are helpful that can be applied to any dietary supplement. And they are first to obtain clarity on what does the product contain. This seems fairly evident and self-explanatory, but you have to know what's in that supplement. It's not always that easy. And I'm going to show you a tool that can be helpful with that. Then to determine the efficacy of the formula. So the ingredients that are in the formula. And that's different than the efficacy of the finished product. And I'll explain that difference as we go along. And then finally, ensuring the purity of the finished product ingredients. So dietary supplements are not FDA regulated as drugs are. They are regulated by the FDA, but differently. In the US, it's as foods. But the good news is that, the better companies are doing this third-party lab verification to demonstrate that what's on the label is actually in the bottle. And what's not on the label, equally importantly, is not on the bottle. So things like heavy metals, toxins, and others. So if we start with the first step of clarity of ingredients, and if we look at the image on the left, we want to know how much of the different nutrients are in the product. Now, if we really wanted to get into the weeds, we could say, well, what form of vitamin B12, for example, is that cyanocobalamin or methylcobalamin, or is it, of any of these? What I did my doctoral work on vitamin E. Is this just alpha tocopherol, or are we talking gamma tocopherol, other tocotrienols? So all of that matters. What else matters is what's on the bottom there. So we see a lot of other additives that we may not want. Food colorings, as you see, FD&C blue and so on, preservatives, potassium sorbate, BHA, BHT, and so on, that can cause issues with people, both those that are sensitive and in aggregate, those that aren't. And then the image to the right, this is from a supplement in the sports performance area. And I would caution, proprietary blends are okay, but you have to know what's in that. So they are listed in order of, so the highest amount is the first, and then the least, amount is the last in this list. But we don't really know how much of which is in there. So for some products, this is okay. And this would actually be, there's some good ingredients here. Creatine monohydrate is a personal favorite supplement of mine, often used by athletes for performance, but good data for cognitive function, and that's why I take it. It's for ATP. But look at caffeine on that list. So we don't know how much caffeine is in this product. We better hope it's not 4,000 of those 4,145 milligrams. You'd be in some serious discomfort. But this is the kind of thing that you really want to know what is in that product. And my colleagues at the NIH, there's actually an Office of Dietary Supplements that many people aren't aware of at the NIH, have this dietary supplement label database. You've got the link there. And their goal is to, as you see here, capture labels of all supplement products sold in the United States. They've got, well over 70,000 back up a couple of years ago. So let's say that you've got a patient taking Dream Body. I hope you don't. But it's at the point of clinical care. Patient comes in and says, "I'm taking Dream Body." Well, what's that? What it is actually is a product that was banned by our FDA because it contained stimulants. It was a slimming capsule. So you see a label like this, and you should immediately have a red flag that this is could be a problem. So this is a challenge in the industry because you get companies that do things the right way, that are basically run like pharmaceutical companies in terms of their quality, and then those that are putting forth products that are harmful. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is, all right, what's the efficacy of the ingredients that are in the formula? And one of my favorite resources for this, your clinicians, about PubMed, of course. That's a great place to go to look for, systematic reviews and meta-analyses to get a good big picture view of, the science for ingredients. But my personal favorite is actually examine.com. This is an unbelievable resource. If you look at this for, just about any dietary supplement. And it's led by a really strong team of scientists and clinicians. I would strongly suggest taking a look. And one of the ones I talk about often is curcumin. They've got over 500 peer-reviewed citations on curcumin. But it's not just all right, here's the mechanisms. They've got that. But it's very tailored towards, all right, here's what patients should think about in terms of dosage, brands sometimes, which is helpful. We need to know what brands have been used in the research, potential interactions, and so on. So this is a great resource. I strongly suggest everyone take a look at this. It's free. They have added content that you can purchase for specific conditions and so on. But this is a great starting place. And there's actually links to PubMed, so you can dive into the details with it. But this is a great place to know, all right, this product contains or produces sulforaphane. Let's look and see, what's there, or anything else that you might be interested in. But that's not where it ends. And this is something that I think, having been in the trenches doing these clinical trials of dietary supplements, if I get a grant, I want to make sure that the supplement that I'm going to choose for the study has what it says it has in it. Otherwise, you've just wasted everyone's time. So there's a lot of factors beyond just the ingredients. So and even within the ingredients, so things like, how is the ingredient sourced? Did they have stringent quality parameters for microbes, for heavy metals, for things like that? I can tell you, some companies have vastly different parameters around what they'll take. So one of the ways that this is measured is colony forming units, CFU. You probably know about that from probiotics. The brand will say it has blank CFU in it. Some companies will allow up to 1 million colony forming units of various microbes. Who knows what they are? Others, the better ones, down to less than 1,000. So that's a factor of 1,000 difference. But then you get things like shipping and storage too. Parameters that are all very important. A lot of these ingredients are sensitive. So these are things that, we just don't think about often. Then there's the formulation. You can list a whole bunch of things and throw everything under the kitchen sink in there. Oh yeah, we know consumers are interested in sulforaphane. Let's throw some curcumin and resveratrol, and alpha lipoic acid. NR, these kind all into the formula, but no one knows how those things, play with each other. So, we have to be mindful of that. More is not always better, in other words, when it comes to ingredients. Then there's the facility. Is it clean? And this varies throughout the world. The U.S. has gotten pretty good about this with good manufacturing practices, but I can tell you companies are very different from company to company in terms of their quality checks. Safety. Is there a third-party lab purity verification? You're gonna hear me say that a lot today. Traceability of their lot numbers. So if there's a problem, a good company is gonna say, all right, this is lot number 43724. It'll be on the bottle. And if there's a problem with it, they will do their due diligence to find out what happened. And then lastly, all these other things too, at the level of the finished product, which is why it's so important, not just to say, oh, I take curcumin or I take sulforaphane, but what brand actually, because there's all these other factors, storage and shipping considerations. I can't emphasize that enough too. That's really important. So with all that in mind, one of the best ways is to, we all know how to use PubMed, is to look at the clinical research on the finished product. So this is the ultimate sort of sign. It's not every product that's good has supportive research, but it's a good sign. And I would really suggest you choose the value for the paper towels with sponges or things like that, but not something you put in your body or your patient's bodies. And avoid these copycats. And what I mean by that is that, if I see this often in the dietary supplement world, where they will cite studies on other finished products and sort of claim it so it sounds like their own, but it's not. And we don't know all these other factors that I have on this slide, for that other product. So really want to use the finished product, the brand that's used in the peer-reviewed research. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. It's really important. Okay. And so sometimes company marketing will have, the actual citations in it. The better companies are doing that. But a lot of others are going to, again, do that copycatting, and it may cost a few dollars less, but it's not worth it. So the last part I'm going to talk about is purity, and here's some good resources. One of which is consumerlab.com. So this is run by physicians that have pharmaceutical and US FDA experience, and their goal is to do independent testing of products. And they've got hundreds of supplements that have been reviewed. It's funded by consumer memberships, which are about $30 per year, but also product analysis fees from supplement companies. This is not a perfect resource. If you go to their website, you'll see they've got big picture levels of, all right, we tested these, whatever it might be, a ginger product, anything, and here's what we found. But it may be some conflicts of interest because basically the companies are paying to get this there. But what I could say is that products that have been identified as problematic by Consumer Lab would be a problem. You want to avoid those. Labdoor.com is one I like probably even more because it's free. So for a lot of our patients that are looking to make choices, you can go to Labdoor. Now they don't have, all supplements. There's so many different brands that are out there, but there's no conflict here. They have a supplement store, but their ratings don't favor any of the products. So let's say we're looking at a fish oil, for example, a product that gets an A and a product that gets an F, A being the best, F being the worst. They have links to that. So there's no preferential treatment there. So that's another one that you can think about that's helpful for patients. So, and this is, I can't emphasize enough how important this is. So you get companies that are done well. This is, Nutramax, which is in Maryland near where I live, that has the quality assurance capabilities that are on par with and probably even exceed from our drug companies. This NSF certification, when you find that is a really good brand. It's not easy to get, and it's a sign that, you've got something really good there. And a number of companies have this. But then there's a whole bunch of bad ones. So glucosamine chondroitin is a product often used for joint health, although it may do a lot of other things alongside that. But they tested 30 supplements. This is consumerlab.com. 4 contain lead. We don't want that. Others had negligible amounts of one of the key ingredients and mislabeling of other things. We see some digested tablets there in somebody. Another analysis found just 2 of the 14 products met the glucosamine content on the label. So we get some real problems with quality control here. You may have heard about this story. This was pretty big news in the US a few years ago. A lot of people, buy their supplements at GNC or Walmart. Why? Because they're cheap. But what they did an analysis and found that echinacea and St. John's wort, which is actually can be a good antidepressant if you get a good brand. There's Cochrane. Dr. Escalona mentioned our work with the Cochrane collaboration. It could be good data for St. John's wort, but not when the product contains no St. John's wort, as we saw here from GNC brand, but contained rice, garlic, and a tropical houseplant. So if you think about that, think about not just the lack of efficacy, but the potential danger. Who knows what's in that houseplant that could cause problems for our patients. So we really need to be aware of the sort of great discrepancy from brand to brand. One of the best things you can do, again, and this is the sort of final step, is to insist upon third-party lab for purity certification. You see some of the better ones here. And again, it just ensures that the product has what it says it has, the things you want, the nutrients, and doesn't have what you don't want, the heavy metals, microbes, and contaminants, and so on. And I like this because this is not required, it's voluntary. It shows that the company cares enough about their quality to actually invest in demonstrating that their product is indeed high quality. Okay, so I really thought I would offer that because while tonight's or today, wherever you are in the world, focus is on sulforaphane, that would apply to any dietary supplement, and I'm happy to elaborate on this if you like. So we talk about sulforaphane. As Dr. Cornblatt had a personal journey with this. Mine actually was personal with me in particular. So I have always had a problem with environmental toxicants. So I travel quite a bit and give lectures all over the world, as part of being a professor. But even in my own city, when walking around, or, I was in New York City last weekend, the amount of acrolein and benzene and so on, just from automobile exhaust, or in Baltimore or DC or wherever I happen to be, was quite crippling for me, where I would breathe that in and then I would have fatigue, and I feel awful actually, cigarette smoke, mold, all these kinds of things. And then as one who's very much into health, my own self, I got some genetic testing and looked at, I had all kinds of variants that suggested poor methylation, suggested poor detoxification. And this is not, I knew enough that this is not a sort of predetermination, but sort of a predisposition. That there are enough things we could do, including sulforaphane, that could help our bodies get rid of some of these toxicants that are so pernicious and damaging to health. Looking at when I started to say, all right, I want to take sulforaphane, what do I do? The same thing I just recommended. I went and looked at the literature. What were the products that had actual clinical trial and data and active clinical trials? I already ate quite a bit of cruciferous vegetables, and it wasn't doing it for me. So I did that same process I just walked you through for my own life. Those 3 steps. And Amoxicillin caught my interest because it had far and away the most clinical trials. And, again, as an integrative medicine researcher and overseeing clinical practice, I was intrigued by the multiple mechanisms of oxidative stress, inflammation, reducing those, and then increasing heat shock protein, expression. Because I'd seen the data on sauna, which I thought was very interesting, and that sulforaphane can do the same thing. So we see with Amoxicillin, there's over 20 clinical trials. I'm going to focus on autism. That's where the most published data are right now. But there are some of them in air pollution. Again, why I was personally taking it, in cancers, other neurological issues like schizophrenia, seasonal allergies. And you say, well, this is such a wide variety of things, but it comes down to those underlying mechanisms that are broad and affect multiple organ systems. Dr. Escalona is functional medicine trained. I work with IFM on research and education. And we understand that we are a system. What happens in the colon doesn't just end there. There are a lot of times there's inflammation throughout the body. So where this all sort of began was in this study led by our mutual colleague, Dr. Fahey, that looked at bioavailability, we see of Abmacol here, and showed that this is done in the context of a gastric acidity sort of setting. But we saw with more bioavailability, so first that Abmacol was bioavailable, but that we saw inflammatory mediators go down with more bioavailability, and the cytoprotective gene expression go up as sulforaphane bioavailability increased. So this was a very careful way of understanding the clinical efficacy of Abmacol. But we get into autism. Just want to go there, and this is a slide that Dr. Cornblatt shared too. We see this this exponential increase of medications, and this would be even more now, which are necessary. But for a lot of chronic diseases, we're masking the symptoms and not getting at the root causes. So this is a typical treatment regimen of an autism patient. Okay, Dr. Escalona treats many patients, but we see just this bevy of different medications that are here. Things like antipsychotics or thyroid antidepressants and so on. Most of these are medications. And this can be quite expensive, in addition to being challenging from a compliance perspective. So if we could help reduce that bevy into a smaller amount of treatments, that would be a great thing. So if we look at sulforaphane and autism, why? So once again, to keep getting back to this, but these multiple pathways of chronic disease, oxidative stress, inflammation, DNA damage, but also heat shock proteins. So Dr. Escalona can share this, but it's for those that aren't very familiar with autism. It's very interesting that parents would report, and parents know their children better than anybody, that when they had a fever, their symptoms were mitigated. So symptoms would go away. So why was this? Well, fever is actually upregulating heat shock proteins. And we know that sulforaphane can do this too. And it's going to be a lot easier to get an autistic person to take sulforaphane than it is to take a sauna, or certainly induce a fever through other mechanisms. So this was something that was postulated to be helpful in this paper here, again, that had Jed Fahey and Andrew Zimmerman and other leaders in this field. And this was the design where young men were treated with either sulforaphane or an indistinguishable placebo. And what we saw here, these are some of the main aberrant behavior checklists. You'll see this in some of the other studies. It's just some of the main ways of quantifying used at the point of clinical care autism. We see things like irritability, lethargy, stereotypy, hyperactivity. They all decreased in the sulforaphane group noticeably. And as compared to placebo, after ceasing taking it for a while, the problems came back, which is sort of another point of evidence. But the challenge with this, as you see in the right bullet there with the asterisk, is that at the time of the study, there are no commercially available products, that could support sulforaphane production. This is why we're blessed to have Dr. Cornblatt and his team that puts them in together. So you're not having to broccoli sprouts. I'll eat anything that helps my health, but broccoli sprouts are challenging to administer. They got a sort of a bitter, pungent taste, spicy even, and are tough to get. It's going to be tough to get a lot of people to eat these, or making the teas is challenging too. So we're really, really fortunate to have something that could sort of bring this to scale clinically. If you look at the studies of Abmacol in particular, this is one that looked at, the bunch of different urinary metabolites with some, clinical feedback as well. Dr. Cornblatt was a co-author on this one, actually, with Jed. Keep seeing him on here, but Jed Fahey. So these are some of the metabolites, and you'll recognize some of these as amino acids that are involved in, they're involved in a lot of things, but things like ultimately serotonin dopamine, norepinephrine production. And then we see a lot of others, that are involved in, function of the central nervous system. And if we look at alongside a lot of these biomarkers, metabolites, some of the parental descriptions of behavior change, which again, for those who haven't treated patients with ASD, this can be greatly disturbing. A lot of times what they go through. So we see pretty consistently, increased ability to communicate, more engaged, more attentive, more energy. And then a lot of see that last subject 7, self-injurious behavior. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that, a dietary supplement can bring about such a huge decrease in the self-injurious behavior. And there's some really powerful stories there. So if we look at another publication that was in the Nature family of journals, which is a high impact journal with a lot of the same researchers. So this is to look at, all right, let's look specifically at how the Amocal product could help with 3 of these pathways. Once again, oxidative stress, inflammation, and heat shock response. And we'll first look at this visually. And we see some of the detox and heat shock proteins in the upper left. Everything above the dotted line means that there is an increase in the expression of these. That we see the inflammatory markers on the right image. We see a decrease in these, and when you look at these in aggregate on the bottom, we see clear, statistically significant effects in increasing the cytoprotective genes and decreasing of the pro-inflammatory genes. This is just some of them that are markers that are listed here. So basically, the conclusion was that this shows promise. If we look at the mechanisms, not just for autism, but for a lot of other things. I mean, my understanding is that there's a number of internal medicine physicians and oncologists and so on. This would underlie a lot of these other conditions as well. So some other ones that are completed but under peer review, again with autism, we see that ABC that we saw before with the different symptoms or characteristics of the disease. This one, it's under peer review, so can't talk too much about it, but there was positive results here as well. And we saw some of the RNA expression, oxidative stress biomarkers alongside the patient outcomes. This was a bigger study with 120 young people. Another one was at UNC Chapel Hill. Once again, you see ABC and so on. And then there's this one looked at the impact on the gut microbiome. This is a really interesting area for those that reduce stool tests. There's a lot of talk about how, what do these mean, for us right now? There's a lot of more of these that are becoming available. I was just a big part of an NIH-funded working group to talk about what can we do with these stool tests at the point of clinical care. How can we make sure that appropriate clinical inference is being made by these companies? Because sometimes it's not. But that said, this study was looking at the gut microbiome. Why is that important? Well, we know for autism that a lot of patients have concurrent comorbid autism and GI symptoms. And why might that be? Once again, sort of immune system dysregulation. You get patients with a lot of food sensitivities and so on, intolerances, frank food allergies sometimes, abnormal intestinal permeability. So leaky gut, as it's often called. So that's a heck of a problem for many different conditions. And then again, unfavorable gut microflora. We don't know exactly what a healthy gut flora is. We know that it varies from person to person. What can be healthy for me might be different for you. But what we do know is that certain patterns and signatures are problematic. Okay, so this is a fascinating area we're going to know more about. So I thought it was pretty cool that this group was looking at these microbiome outcomes. A couple more. Again, a lot of these autism studies that are underway. This one's interesting in that functional MRI for those that are in this field know that's a pretty high level assessment. So it's going to be interesting to see what those data look like. So again, why all these different why do you need this many different studies for autism? Well, as Dr. Escalona and others can tell you that there's lots of, the saying, one autism patient, then one autism patient. I mean, there's such a heterogeneity in terms of symptoms, and these different studies have different intervention forms and length and so on. So, and even response. So one of our colleagues, Dr. Jahoon Kim, has, he's published some work, but a lot of what he's done, with patients has just had incredible feedback. So, you look at some of these types of things that are underlined, just patients that had severe temper issues, so the worst that he'd ever seen in many years of treating patients with autism. And you've seen significant improvements in language, social interaction, motor skills. A lot of this coming down to reduced neural inflammation. Patients sleeping better. Again, the social interaction. So, and this is happening pretty quickly. So what I think was kind of neat with this too is that a lot of parents say, gosh, what happens if I take this? And they notice things like better sleep, relaxation, faster recovery, and better mood. Why is this? A lot of neuroinflammation. We're all breathing, most of us are breathing air that's not pristine, drinking water, EMFs, even some of that is, all these things are around us. So this is an area where I think there's a lot of potential. I'll get into very briefly some of the other studies. This is a publication in BMJ Open that was looking at brain injury. So once again, Amoxicillin could be helpful for brain injury because it's reducing neural inflammation. So this is one, the results are not in yet, but this is one where the trial protocol was published, and you can look this one up to learn a little bit more. We're excited to see the results here. Again, being linked with our trauma center, University of Maryland School of Medicine, the head of it is interested in this area too, because a lot of these TBI patients, their life is very different after it, and hopefully this can be one part of the solution. COVID-19, interestingly, Dr. Kim published this paper that looked at sulforaphane as a potential treatment for this. I mean, again, managing, a hyper pro-inflammatory state is one of the ways, in addition to some potential antiviral properties as a standalone. This is a recent publication, or I'm sorry, a poster that was presented from a team at University of Arizona and elsewhere, where they looked at this for heavy smokers. So again, another randomized trial that showed that Amoxicillin could be helpful in smokers. So it's not to condone smoking, but a lot of times you may have seen another interesting piece of data that walking around a city can give one the exposure similar to smoking. So this is something that we really need to be aware of with our patients. And then finally, this is Raymond's favorite journal, probably my favorite journal too, if I had to choose one. It's like choosing a favorite child, it's difficult, but this is a great journal, one that we've chosen to publish our work in because it is so interesting. But this is one that showed recently reductions in seasonal allergies. We see some of this as a combination, again, not always going to be sulforaphane or Amoxicillin as a standalone, but a lot of times as a part of a treatment process. Here they saw great reductions, VSE being the Amoxicillin, broccoli sprout extract. And we saw this nice reduction when combined with steroids for that. But again, the fact that it's helping reduce inflammation. But I just want to say before we get into questions that, while sulforaphane can be a great sort of tool for a wide variety of conditions, it's not the only tool. There's so many things that go into this, as a lifestyle medicine enthusiast, whether it's exposure to nature, getting the right light. It's become a passion of mine, of minimizing blue light in the evening. As you see the sunrise here on the East Coast of the US, getting early sun exposure in the day, good sleep is fundamental, and a nutrient dense diet. alongside movement and all kinds of other things are important. So we'll stop here, and happy to take questions that you may have, and appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
All right. So we can, we'll leave the slide deck up if you want to leave it up.
Mhm.
But I do have a couple of questions that were, that some of the participants had sent ahead of time. One question was about the speed of toxin removal. So you had mentioned some studies in China about the removal of benzene, I think, from the blood. And so one participant had asked, if you take the product and you've been exposed to some of these toxins, how quickly can it kind of clear it from the blood from your experience in clinical research and from what you've seen in the literature?
I can take that one, Chris. So
Yeah.
believe it or not, one day, literally within the first day, if you do, and Chris can share some of these different laboratories that can assess some of these heavy metals and toxins, but within one day, you can start seeing modulation in a positive direction. And that was shown in those studies that were published within 2 weeks, the entire group. But some people, it can be within one day where you can start actually measuring in the urine, for example, benzene metabolites, acrolein metabolites, and some of these other heavy metals.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for that, Brian.
Yeah.
We're gonna cut short at 7:10 if that's okay for you guys. Just because we're a little bit over. But Chris, please answer that. I mean, I think you had some comments about that.
The only thing there are labs that can measure this. Genova Diagnostics. There's let's see, Great Plains Laboratory. You can measure these urinary metabolites. So we often recommend, like I'm traveling right now. I'm in Atlanta. So before I fly and do these kinds of things, I might load up a little bit more on those days. But I like the fact that there's that short time frame. When you start to enhance your body's detoxification. So it's not like a lot of things that take a while to build up. Say it's like an antidepressant, takes a few weeks. With this, it's fairly immediate.
Thanks for that, guys. So for anyone in the audience that would like to ask some questions, just type them over in the chat box, and we will. I'll ring them up as you type them over. We do have a couple more questions here. Chris, Brian, what are the specific toxins that sulforaphane can clear out? If you have any, data on what specific types they could actually clear.
Well, acrolein and benzene are two. I think mycotoxin, mycotoxins from exposure to mold. It's not just the mold we need to be aware about, but it's the many mycotoxins that the mold. I'm sure some of your patients have experienced issues with that. They can be fairly persistent if you don't have something to help get rid of them. Brian, do you have any others?
Yeah, well, I'll also share some of the heavy metals that have been proven. Heavy metal and like aluminum and lead. We actually have an interesting case down in North Carolina of a child who had tremendous amounts of aluminum toxicity, and also autism. And then they were able to do with Great Plains a test looking at aluminum clearance and pretty tremendous modulation there, and again, decreased neuroinflammation. I can't say enough about the mycotoxins. You guys obviously have problems with typhoons. We have hurricanes. We have some great colleagues down in Austin, Texas. One of the first integrative practices to use Abmacol back in 2012, and Dr. Sharon Hausman-Cohen, and they deal with a lot of people with mold sensitivities, people with, just foggy brain is what they call it. They can't remember words. They can't, remember a list, why they went to the store, why they walked downstairs. And then you give the sulforaphane product, and you can actually clear the mycotoxins that are responsible for that neuroinflammation. So mycotoxins, I think, might be one of the best environmental toxicants that sulforaphane is able to clear. And we're doing some work down in Florida with algae blooms and mycotoxins, even in some animals, including, not to get myself in trouble, but perhaps even manatees. So kind of some really fun work that we'll be able to share in hopefully maybe a year or so when we come back, if you want us to, for another webinar.
Interesting. Thanks for that, Brian, Chris. We do have a question from Jay. He had typed it over, and he's asking, how long should you take Avmacol if you're a healthy person who just wants to detoxify, kind of the daily stressors of pollution and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I take it, and we recommend those that are interested in this. So the sort of your performance and health-oriented people who don't necessarily have any serious conditions like some of the ones we talked about, but just want to stay well or perform better. I take it daily. It's what we recommend a lot of people to do. I don't, so I think that's one that, a lot of supplements you want to cycle. If you're taking mushrooms for immune enhancements, you may want to cycle that, for example. If you're taking an adaptogenic herb, you may want to cycle that. But sulforaphane is one that, just given the world that we live in, where I feel like it's one of the ones, like alongside a multivitamin and vitamin D and a few others that are part of the regular sort of core or staples for me and for our patients.
Okay.
And I would second that, and I would say, early on we were scared, like, are these pathways going to be shut down over time if you keep giving this? And as you saw in the China study from our colleagues, 18 weeks later, it's just as robust as day 1 and 2. So we do look at the biomarkers to make sure that we're not giving any kind of negative feedback loop kind of activity here. But we see even with 6-month studies that you're still able to robustly induce some of these enzymes that protect us and also drive down inflammation. So yeah, there seems to be no problems with taking it daily. And as Chris shared, when I do like a long bike ride, even though I'm on the rural roads, there's a lot of diesel exhaust. So I'll double up my dosing for that day, just knowing that there's going to be this acute challenge I'm going to get from airborne toxicity.
Thanks for that, Brian, and Chris as well. There is one last question here, and the question states that, at what pollution level, in your experience, does toxicity become a real issue? And on that note, is it just sulforaphane, or are there other things that we can do to kind of mitigate those toxicity issues?
Great question.
Right, you want to lead first, or you want me to?
Yeah, so my background was in oncology, and I'll say, and I scare my kids when I say this, it's so random. And so that 1 part per billion benzene that you might breathe in this morning, taking a walk, hopefully we inspire you to take a walk tomorrow morning when you get up, first thing in the morning before you start work or your life. All it takes is 1 part per billion coming into our body, getting metabolized, hitting the wrong part of DNA to cause cancer. So really, there's really, there's limits sometimes that you're allowed to be exposed to in industry, but still, it's really these chance events and random events. So yeah, I think there's no real safe limit, to be honest. And I think doing everything we can to hedge our bets. So things like sulforaphane, sweating. Chris said one of the reasons I work out, not just stay healthy, but also sweating was one of the best other modalities to remove heavy metals from our body. They've seen this in there's a guy, Dr. Stephen Genius, who does work with autistic kids as well, and the sweat is just loaded with these toxins. So I think I'm just getting activity, going outside for so many reasons, and taking a supplement that promotes sulforaphane production is a good kind of tandem. And then if you want to see, if you go into Google patents, you can see some combinations. I won't share it because I don't want to make this something more than an academic talk here, but we have a lot of combination products that we see synergy with some other natural phytonutrients, and we'll be producing some of these products in the years to come.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Dr. Cornblatt said. Anytime you can sweat, whether it's sauna or just from exercise, I mean, being in the Philippines with nice warm weather, you have probably ample opportunity to sweat. But I would add some other things to think about would be N-acetylcysteine, which can help provide the raw materials. Amycol can help increase glutathione production, but N-acetylcysteine provides the raw materials to be able to optimize that. Some other things too, there's not as much data, but spirulina is another thing that's got some data, and chlorella that can help detox heavy metals. I mean, there's not as much data as there is for sulforaphane, but I think those are pretty good ideas as well. And we just need to be aware that there's so much in our food, even if we eat an organic diet, a lot of these chemicals that are in our food, that it's almost impossible, I think, to get back to the very part of the question. I think almost all of us, unless you're living in the mountains somewhere and drinking pristine, mountain stream water somewhere, we're all in a chemical environment now. The Environmental Working Group I really recommend taking a look at their work. It's excellent in terms of the products that we and our patients use, for soaps and shampoos, and certainly cleaning around the house. There's so many chemicals that were around that just about everybody, our bodies around, our inherent detox mechanisms were not prepared for this onslaught of chemicals. So those are some of the other things as part of a comprehensive plan that I would do.
Thanks, Chris. And I guess just to wrap up the entire webinar, super thank you for both your times this morning. I know you woke up so early for this. But how about a couple more last statements before we end the webinar and we say goodnight to everyone here in the Philippines and Southeast Asia?
Sure. I think my main thing would be, that last slide where it's part of a comprehensive lifestyle. Really, you got to think about this whole picture of what the patient's lifestyle is, what their environmental exposures are. And I'm just glad to see folks on the call, on the meeting, to think about these environmental exposures. We think about smoking, we think about obesity, but these environmental toxicants, I feel, are sort of like the cigarettes of the 21st century now. There's so much out there, and there are some dietary supplements that could help, but just make sure that you use ones that sort of meet those 3 criteria, because then your patients are going to get good outcomes and you can feel safe that they're not going to get something that might actually hurt them.
And I'll add to second that, it's in my opinion, we get one shot, one chance to be on this planet, so make the most of it. Some really easy things we can do, and we can come back if you want, Chris and I, and talk about nutrition a little bit more. Simple steps like going to the supermarkets here in the US and just staying on the perimeter, stay out of the middle. All that processed food it's literally going to kill you. I mean, literally, there's no other way around that. I know food companies are getting mad at me for saying that, but simple interventions, and sulforaphane isn't the only solution. You have to take a proactive role here. It's not just take a pill and that's it. I exercise every single day. I know Chris does, and the right types. And again, just balancing stress and, just spending lots of time with family and friends. This comprehensive integrative wheel that Chris showed, that one picture speaks millions of words there. It really is this multifaceted approach, but we can definitely biohack and lead ourselves to positive health journey. But it's going to take some work on all of our parts, not just the physicians, but your patients and everyone. But sulforaphane is just one part of that amazing journey we can take that promotes health and wellness. And with that, just thank you, everyone. And we're here to, we have our contacts here if you want to ask some more questions, and hopefully we'll come back and share some more study updates as these get published. So take care, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brian. For everyone who attended, thank you for sticking it out for the whole hour, or hour and a half, sorry. And we do have another follow-up webinar to this one. We'll be sending out the recording to everyone who had registered. I know that there's a big conference for autism and special needs now that's happening. That's why most of the practitioners couldn't come, but they did ask for the webinar recording afterwards. So we'll do a follow-up webinar on the clinical experience locally, so I can share some of the cases we've used the product on, or sulforaphane on with a couple of other interventions that we've done from a functional medicine end. So, and with that, Brian, Chris, and everyone else on the team, thank you. I see Joe Mark on the chat box. Thanks, Joe Mark. Thanks everyone else for listening. And we will be with you on the next webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.